Today's lesson is pyramids around the world. Hi, everybody. My name is Roger.
And I'm Mike.
And today we're going to go traveling, not to any one specific place, but we're going to be talking about these very large triangular structures around the world called pyramids. And, of course, the world's most famous pyramids, of course, would be the ones in Egypt, but there are pyramids all over the world for you to enjoy.
That's right. These are amazing creations, and once you realize that there are pyramids in very different parts of the world, and these pyramids were often built kind of around the same time, roughly, in history, it sort of starts you to imagine and wonder, like, what caused this sudden growth and this explosion in the building of pyramids in very different, very widely separated parts of the world thousands and thousands of years ago. Pyramids have held a long fascination for humans, and so we're going to be looking at some of the most famous pyramids. Some of them you'll probably know and be able to predict. Some of them might be a little surprising to you, but they're all fascinating, amazing architectural and historical wonders.
And, of course, if you go check them out, they're great backdrops for selfies. I'm sure all of you are looking for any selfie opportunities you can find. So let's get to it, everybody. Let's talk about pyramids around the world. Let's listen to the first part, and then we'll come back to discuss it.
Pyramids around the world. When we hear the word pyramid, the image that often comes to mind is one of enormous triangular monuments in a sandy desert. It turns out, however, that these architectural marvels can be found all over the world on almost every continent.
大家好，第一部分我们看到片语 something come to mind 指浮现脑海。例如 When I think of Paris, the Eiffel Tower comes to mind right away. 我一想到巴黎，埃菲尔铁塔就立刻浮现脑海。或是 I'm trying to think of any good restaurants near here, but nothing comes to mind. 我试着要想附近有什么好餐厅，但一家都想不到。另外片语中的动词 come 也可以用 spring, S-P-R-I-N-G, spring, 或是 leap, L-E-A-P, leap 来代替。我们可以说 When I think of California, Disneyland immediately springs to mind. 当我想到加州，脑海中立刻浮现迪士尼乐园。或者 Nothing leaped to mind when the teacher asked if we had any questions. 老师问我们是否有任何问题时，我们什么也没想到。再来我们看到形容词 architectural 指建筑学的或是建筑上的。举例来说The temple's architectural design features an elegant symmetry. 这座庙宇的建筑设计特色在于雅致的对称性。或是 Florence is famous for its architectural beauty. 佛罗伦斯以其美丽的建筑闻名。另外，将 architectural 字尾的 U-R-A-L 去掉，就变成了名词 architect, 意思是建筑师。像是 Walter loved to build things as a child,And he eventually became an architect. Walter 从小就喜欢建造东西，他最终成为了一位建筑师。也可以说 The architect took on a project to design the new shopping mall. 那位建筑师接下新购物中心设计案。接着我们看到单字 marvel. 这个字是名词，指奇迹、令人惊奇的成就，或是不可思议的人或事物。例如Driverless cars are truly a marvel of modern technology. 自动驾驶汽车真是现代科技的奇迹。或是 The Grand Canyon is one of nature's marvels. 大峡谷是大自然的奇迹之一。另外 marvel 也可以当作动词，表示大为赞叹或是感到惊奇。我们可以说 Julie marveled at the beauty of the diamond ring. Julie 对那枚钻戒的美丽赞叹不已。也可以说 Visitors to Rome marvel at the city's ancient structures. 去罗马游玩的旅客对该市中的古老建筑感到惊奇不已。再补充 marvel 的形容词 marvelous, M-A-R-V-E-L-O-U-S, marvelous, 意思是令人惊叹的或是极好的。像是 The singer put on a marvelous show for the children. 该名歌手为孩童进行一场非常精彩的表演。或者 Darby took some marvelous pictures of people she met in Africa. Darby 为他在非洲遇到的人拍了一些很棒的照片。
Okay, so again, we're talking about pyramids around the world. They exist in lots and lots of places. And the first part today is an introduction to this topic. And it says, when we hear the word pyramid, the image that often comes to mind is one of enormous triangular monuments in a sandy desert. Indeed, that's the image that comes to mind. If somebody says the word pyramid, then what do you think of? What comes to mind? What do you think of? And you might think of these enormous triangular monuments in a sandy desert, and probably specifically you're thinking about the pyramids in Egypt there, just outside of Cairo there. And this is a good description of them. They're enormous. They're huge. They're mammoth. They're colossal. And they're triangular, which means they look like triangles. And in this particular case, they're located in a sandy desert. A desert is a dry area of the world. And sometimes they've got cactus and things like that, but sometimes they don't have any plants at all. They have lots of sand, so we describe them as being sandy, like a sandy beach.
That's right. So this is basically kind of telling us or predicting if someone walked up to you and just said the word pyramid, what kind of image would come into your mind, right? The pyramids in Egypt, those are the ones we would most often think about. But then if I said, talk about another pyramid, a lot of people would stand there and go, I can't really think of any other. But as the article says, it turns out, however, that these architectural marvels can be found all over the world, on almost every continent. That's right. So if you're only thinking of those three famous pyramids there in Egypt, well, you haven't even scratched the surface of the human fascination with these architectural marvels. Architectural is talking about the design and the building of, well, buildings. An architect is a person who designs buildings, usually on paper. They're not the engineers. They're not the construction workers. They're the people who do the math and the design, the art and the engineering on paper to sort of plan out and draw the concept of the building. And then a marvel is something wonderful, amazing, fantastic. Taipei 101 is a marvel of engineering. It's also an architectural marvel, you could say. And yes, the pyramids are probably some of the oldest architectural marvels, and certainly the oldest marvels like that are still around, that we can still see today. But they're not just in Egypt. They're found all over the world on almost every continent. That's right. So we have a bit of traveling to do.
So let's get to it. Let's first talk about the granddaddy of the pyramids of Giza in Egypt. Let's listen now to the second part of our lesson.
Pyramids of Giza, Egypt. Let's start with the iconic objects of that sandy desert picture, the Pyramids of Giza. At this pyramid complex, visitors can see the oldest and last remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, this impressive structure was built in the 26th century BC as a tomb for the Egyptian king Khufu. Requiring around 2.3 million stone blocks for its construction, and with an original height of 147 meters, it has colossal proportions, even by today's standards.
Okay, so as promised, we're going to talk about the most famous pyramids of all, the pyramids of Giza, Egypt. Okay, those are the ones in Egypt, in the sandy desert there outside of the city of Cairo. Let's start with the iconic objects of that sandy desert picture, the pyramids of Giza. So that's where we're going to start because most people will think about these pyramids there in Egypt. They are iconic. If something's iconic, of course, they represent something. They kind of give us a picture of something. And in this particular case, they're iconic of pyramids because most people think of the Egyptian pyramids when somebody mentions the word pyramid.
Absolutely. At this pyramid complex, visitors can see the oldest and last remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Yep, the pyramids are still there. And this is described as a pyramid complex because there are, of course, 3 pyramids there, ranging in size from the Great Pyramid of Khufu down to the smaller 3rd pyramid, I believe, of Menkaure. And, of course, also right there in front of the pyramids, we have the Sphinx, that famous stone statue of a half lion, half human, which is another place to have a great selfie, as Roger mentioned. So there's a lot of different buildings there. There's the pyramids, the Sphinx, and many other smaller temple buildings. That's why it's a complex. It's a collection of buildings that are all built or around the same time to sort of serve the same purpose. And visitors, even today in 2022, you will be seeing the oldest and last remaining wonder of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Here we're using wonder, of course, as a noun, not like I wonder what I'm going to have for lunch today, but a wonder, something amazing, something incredible, something, as it said in our first paragraph, that you would describe as an architectural marvel. And back in the old days, back in the days of sort of classical Greece and Rome and Egypt, ancient Egypt, they had 7 wonders of the ancient world. These included the Hanging Gardens of Babylon, of course, the Colossus of Rhodes, which is sort of like the ancient version of the Statue of Liberty, and several others. All of them are gone. That's right. War, destruction, earthquakes in many cases destroyed all of these wonders except the Great Pyramids. They're still there.
Indeed, and the next sentence here says, known as the Great Pyramid of Giza, this impressive structure was built in the 26th century BC. as a tomb for the Egyptian king Khufu. So, my goodness, this structure is quite old. It was built in the 26th century BC, before the birth of Christ there, so it's really, really old, and it was built as a tomb or a grave for King Khufu when he died, and they put his body in there with all sorts of other things, and requiring around 2.3 million stone blocks for its construction, and with an original height of 147 meters, it has colossal proportions, even by today's standards. So this sentence here basically describes this pyramid here. It required around 2.3 million stone blocks for its construction. If you talk about the process of building something, you talk about the construction. The construction of the new skyscraper will take 1 year, for example. So in this particular case, it needed lots of stone blocks there. Some people suggest that the people living there at the time were just not capable of building such a structure. So, of course, the aliens from outer space had to come and help them. Of course, we know that the people back then were very much capable of building such a structure. So the alien thing is a bunch of nonsense. But in any case, construction refers to the building of something.
That's right. And if you're going to get a big pile of stones, 2.3 million stones, and put them on top of each other, you're going to go pretty high up. So that the original height was 147 meters. It's a little bit shorter now because time has worn the rock away and other things have happened. But still, it was getting up around 150 meters high. This is a building of colossal proportions. It's really, really big. In other words, when we use the adjective colossal, we're talking about really, really big. The 747 or the Airbus A380, that is a colossal airplane. It's a really, really big airplane. It has colossal proportions. The proportions are the measurements of things. If you're going to be buying a new kitchen table or a sofa or a fridge, you're going to want to know how wide it is, how deep it is, how tall it is. Those three measurements give us its size in space, its sort of square metered size or its three-dimensional size. Those are the proportions we're talking about. It's really big across the bottom. It takes a long time to walk around, and it's 147 meters high. It's built of solid stone, even by today's standards. Even judging it from the point of view of a person in 2022, the Great Pyramid is really, really big.
Yep, a proportion could also be a ratio, how big something is compared to something else. So, of course, it had colossal proportions. It was much bigger than other structures at the time, and even much bigger than structures well into the 20th century. And now, of course, we've got other structures that are taller, but maybe not as big in area, but still the pyramids of Giza, Egypt are quite impressive. Okay, that brings us to the end of the second part of today's lesson. Now let's let's go talk about the Pyramid of Cestius in Italy.
Pyramid of Cestius, Italy. Built sometime between 18 and 12 BC, the Pyramid of Cestius is one of the best preserved buildings from the Roman imperial period and serves as an excellent example of the Roman fascination with Egyptian culture and architecture at the time. Commissioned as a personal tomb by Gaius Cestius, a wealthy Roman official, the 35-meter-tall pyramid displays traces of its Roman heritage in the painted frescoes on the interior walls.
最后第三部分我们看到形容词 imperial 表示帝国的或是皇帝的，像是 The Imperial Palace in Japan is now a major tourist attraction. 日本的皇居如今是个主要的旅游景点。或是 The museum is hosting an exhibition on the imperial history of France. 那间博物馆正主办一场关于法国皇家历史的展览。
All right, as promised, we're now going to talk about a pyramid in Italy. Italy's got all sorts of old structures there, so if you go to Italy, you'll probably never have enough time to see everything. But we're going to talk about the Pyramid of Cestius in Italy, built sometime between 18 and 12 BC. The Pyramid of Cestius is one of the best preserved buildings from the Roman imperial period and serves as an excellent example of the Roman fascination with Egyptian culture and architecture at the time. So the Romans, of course, knew about Egypt, and the Romans knew about what they had built. They were impressed, so the Romans decided to build their own pyramid, and in this particular case, they built it between 18 and 12 BC, and it's a really well-preserved building. It's one of the best preserved buildings from the Roman imperial period. If something's preserved, that means it is in its original state, or at least very close to it, and it's best preserved. It has been well taken care of. They don't let moss grow on it or mold and things like that. They've kept it quite clean and in its original condition.
That's absolutely amazing. And this is from the Roman imperial period. This, of course, happened after Julius Caesar was killed and Octavian, who became Augustus, and that's kind of the beginning of the Roman Empire. So we're thinking of the period of Augustus, Mark Antony, of course, his famous romance with Cleopatra, and this was a kind of a popular thing at that time, this whole Egyptian culture. It says this imperial period, the beginning of the empire period of Roman history, serves as an excellent example of the Roman fascination with Egyptian culture and architecture at the time. If we were using today's language, we would say that Egyptian things back then, at that time, were really hot. They were really popular. Everyone was maybe dressing in Egyptian-style clothing or listening to Egyptian-style music and certainly designing Egyptian-style buildings. There was a fascination at that time in Rome with everything about Egypt, the culture, the architecture, that kind of stuff. A fascination is a deep and probably passionate interest in something. If you have a certain hobby, if you like to read a certain type of book or watch a certain type of movie, if you're really, really interested in something and it gives you a lot of pleasure and enjoyment, you probably have a fascination with that type of thing.
Okay, so why was this pyramid built? Well, here in the next sentence it says, commissioned as a personal tomb by Gaius Cestius, a wealthy Roman official, the 35-meter-tall pyramid displays traces of its Roman heritage in the painted frescoes on the interior walls. So it was commissioned as a personal tomb by Gaius Cestius. So if something's commissioned, somebody pays for its construction, and of course they pay somebody to build it for them. So it was commissioned as a personal tomb for this wealthy Roman official by the name of Gaius Cestius. Hey, can you build this pyramid for this guy? He needs to have a really nice tomb that kind of looks like the pyramids in Egypt. It's not going to be as big as them, but it's still going to be pretty cool.
Absolutely. And yet, not 147 meters tall, 35 meters tall. But still, Gaius Cestius wasn't a pharaoh of ancient Egypt. He was just a wealthy Roman official. He was like a local politician or something like that. So still a 35-meter tall pyramid is pretty good. It's got an Egyptian look to it, obviously. It is a pyramid. But it also, as we read there, displays traces of its Roman heritage in the painted frescoes on the interior walls. Romans had a fascination with Egyptian stuff, but they were still Romans. They were still very proud of their Roman history, their Roman culture. So there were traces, there was evidence, there were signs of the Roman heritage, of course, of this pyramid, and also the wealthy Roman person who was inside the pyramid. But someone's heritage is basically their culture from where they came from. If you're very proud of your culture, it might be something you learned from your parents or grew up with. And maybe if you move overseas, if you were a Taiwanese person who moved over to Australia or something, you might be interested in telling people about your heritage, you know, cooking foods for them, having these things that give you a cultural connection to where you come from. That's kind of what a heritage is, and this is often expressed in clothing styles, in the food you eat, and in the way you might decorate things. So the inside of this Roman Egyptian pyramid, sort of this mix of the two, it had a very Roman look on the inside, painted frescoes on the interior walls. So we're not imagining the sort of ancient Egyptian style art with the writing and things like that. We're imagining more Roman style art painted on the walls. That's basically what a fresco is. It's a wall painting.
Done with watercolor on wet paste or wet plaster, so you've got to get it right because the plaster will dry, and hence you'll have a painting on the wall. In this particular case, they were on the inside walls or the interior walls. It's probably quite impressive to see. Check it out the next time you're in Italy. Okay, that brings us to the end of the last part of our lesson for today. It's time to turn things over now to our Chinese teacher.
各位同学大家好，我是 Hanny。 我们来看今天的文法重点。课文第一部分的第二句写道 It turns out, however, that these architectural marvels can be found all over the world on almost every continent. 然而结果却是这些建筑奇观，它就是指金字塔，可以在世界各地找到，几乎每一周都有。那首先要介绍的是 turn out， 它是指说结果是怎么样，最后演变成怎么样，用来带出事情的发展啊，或是最终的结果。那通常会暗示着说结果和想象或预期的不同。我们文中用到 it turns out 加 that 子句的句型去表达结果却是怎么样。那我们这边也补充一下 turn out 的其他用法，像第一种你可以用 turn out to be 加上名词或形容词，那么 to be 可以省略，这个用法就可以表达最后成为点点点，最后被发现它可能是具有某种身份啊、特性啊或是能力等等。举例来说 The man claimed he was a priest But he turned out to be a fraud. 那名男子声称自己是个牧师，结果他却是个骗子。好，那么第二个用法我们可以用 as it turns out 逗号主词加动词，像这样的句型可以用来说明某事的后续发展有令人意外的结果或情况，就类似我们中文说的结果是怎么样，结果证明怎么样怎么样。举例来说 As it turns out The missing puzzle piece was under my pillow. 结果那片不见的拼图就在我的枕头下。好，那么另外文中它用到形容词 architectural 来描述建筑学的建筑上的，它的名词是 architecture， 是指建筑学、建筑风格，而这个字呢就是来自 architect A-R-C-H-I-T-E-C-T。 我们来学习它的字根 A-R-C-H或者是拼作 ARCHI 这一类的字根，它表示首要的、支配的或是原来的、开始等等。那它常常会接在其他名词之前，表示说它含有那种较早的啊、最基本的，或者是位阶较高，对其他人有掌控权的意思。 那我们看到在 architect 这个字当中呢 ARCHI 表示首要的， TECT 表示建造者，首要建造者应该很容易联想到 architect， 它有建筑师的意思。好，那么另外 ARCH 这个字根呢也常常加上字尾 Y， 然后去表达政体、政府、统治等等的意思。我们就来补充2个有这一类字根字尾的单字哦。像第一个 monarchy， MONARCHY， 那它的字首 MON 表示单一，那么字根 ARCH 表示支配，单一支配。那只有一个人在支配统治，应该可以联想到 monarch 是表示君王、帝王的意思，后面再加上这个名词字尾 Y 就会变成 monarchy， 就可以表达君主政体啊，君主制国家。第二个补充的是 anarchy， ANARCHY， 它的字首 AN 就是来自 A 在母音前面就拼成了 AN 了。好，那这个字首表示无，那么字根 ARCH 表示领导人， Y 是名词字尾，那无领导人，没有领导人应该可以联想到 anarchy， 它是指无政府状态了。好，那么以上是今天重点整理，我们回顾今天单字吧。
Marvel. This mechanical watch is a marvel of engineering. Construction. Construction of the apartment building will begin next April. Proportion. Rachel was amazed by the huge proportions of the tropical plant. Imperial. We spent the day walking around the gardens of the Imperial Palace in Tokyo. Fascination. Matt's fascination with trains dates back to his early childhood. Commission. Shane commissioned a painting of his late wife to hang in the living room. Heritage. This building is a part of our national heritage and should be preserved. Interior. The interior walls have been painted an awful shade of green. Well, that brings us to the end of another edition of our program, and please make sure you join us again next time. From all of us here, I am Mike.
I am Roger. See you next time.